Hello and welcome to the NanoPano DIY instruction guide. I've put this together for folks who purchased a DIY kit from me or for those who are going to build their own, print their own, and secure their own hardware and everything once the files are released. So on this side are all the tools that you're going to need, which we'll go over in a moment. And on this side is everything that you get in the kit or that you'd have to print out or source on your own. And it's roughly in the same order that we would tackle the assembly from this way to this way. And then we've got the tools. So let me go in order of what we're going to talk about. This is the base or the body, and we've got the exterior body hardware and components here. Then we've got the lens cone, and this is I call it now the plus version, and that name will probably change by the time this video comes out. Pro, plus, whatever is the one with the interchangeable lens cones. There is a version that has it already modeled in. It's not separable. It's all one whole flush body. A lot smoother lines on that one. But this one has more of a pro feeling. And if you wanted to print your own, if at some point you get a printer or you find somebody that could print cones for you, extra ones, that'll be great. Or, you know, the mounting point is so simple that you can even attach your own pinhole if you wanted to. Let's go over the door. The door, you see, has all these little holes. These are for the magnets, which we'll talk about in a moment. The base has those on this side as well. Let's put that over to that side for now. The interior has some components to it, some seals, and the film gate itself and some other hardware. So that's what this is for the interior and the film bay, and then all the hardware that goes on to the door. If you purchased a grip, or if you're making a grip and you're not using a custom one, then this is the grip hardware. And I also include an M3 wrench, an M2 wrench, and then some extra, pretty much one screw of extras of each size that wasn't included in the kit, and then a couple of extra nuts and a couple of extra M3 nuts and M2 nuts. So that's it for the parts, and we'll go into the hardware once we break apart each section. For the tools that you need, so in the instructions I mentioned that you'd need CA glue, a screwdriver, and a cutters or scissors. What I did not mention is that it's pretty handy to have a big beefy flathead screw for the tripod bushings, a lighter for the door hinge, which is technically optional. I'll show you another trick if you don't want to do that. And then this marker pen, silver, gold, white, whatever you've got to mark the bungee cord for cutting. But you may not need that if you're going to omit the lighter method. If you're not going to do the lighter method, you're going to do my backup cheater method. In a pinch method, then you don't really need these two things. But you'll still need everything else. All right, so that is the normal tools you need. But let me put these to the side because there are some expert tools, especially for those of you who are going to print at home. You're probably printing something at this scale for the first time. A lot of you probably aren't. You're pretty knowledgeable about this stuff, but just in case, I got to cover the bases for the DIY community, growing community out there. If you're not very well experienced, then you're going to learn that you need a couple more things when it comes to printing. A tweezer set is always helpful to get stuff out of nooks and crannies. I like having something big and beefy and angled like this. And then one that's a blunt nose. And I'll put the kit that this one is in. I like the kit that this one is in. It comes with one of these. And then it comes with one of these that I bent it a little bit there at the tip to kind of get into a few more small areas that this, let me refocus there, that this one here cannot get into. A spudger is always very helpful. I like this one that's included in that kit with these two. These have been around in my shop for 5 years, these three, so they've stood the test of time. I've added this one recently just to get a little bit more bite on some of the plastic and some of the holes, and I'll show you why when we get to the base. For enlarging holes, for the M2 holes, you will want a 5/64 bit. drill bit. And for the M3 holes, you'll want a 1/8 drill bit. Those are handy because you don't know what kind of tolerances you're going to end up with if you're trying different materials, different color materials. In my experience, that happens a lot of the time with my prints. Is somebody's printing them out of this nice color that they've never printed before, and they want to use their very first print that they got off of it. So it may be undersized. A lot of time it's going to be oversized, so you're going to have smaller holes. So that's where these come in to enlarge them a little bit, and then that's where something like this comes in, because you can close it down, see, and then you kind of like enlarge the slots for the nuts, like poking it into the slot and then doing a little bit of that action. So I'm not going to do the actual full build myself. I'm going to walk through some parts. I will show you some of the complicated parts, at least the ones that are not simple screwing in and putting in nuts into the slots, because you should be able to get through that part pretty easily without my help. But for everything else, I know that some of these things are not very common methods, so that's where I'll show you with the bungee cord and the foam seals in the tighter areas. For the magnets, the same reasoning. When you're oversized, the holes for the magnets are probably too tight, so I like having a little rubber mallet to pound them in, and then I usually just work my way with the magnets. I put them in a column, and then I just like tap, 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 tap. And then the last thing I got, you can't go wrong. You probably aren't going to need these for the DIY very much that I provided, because I try to clean up all the really whack stuff, but there may be some areas that either because of time or I just did a rough cleaning of it. I like having one of these bigger chisels, the number 18. One of the smaller chisels is the number 17. Your good old number 11 X-Acto blade. Oh, that's an extra there. And then I like having this rounded blade. This is the number 10. Comes in really handy in a lot of certain spots, especially with some of my designs. So actually these three alone here, I'll be offering as a little bit of a kit soon, and show you how to make some money out, because you got to buy these in bulk. So that's a good opportunity there to sell some of those if you're going to go get into the commercial license aspect of it. A little bit of helicoid grease may come in handy for some spots. Very useful. I'll show you why, but you could use petroleum jelly or just any other lubricant that you've got that is similar to it, that you can trust putting on plastic without running and getting it all over the place. For the CA glue, expert tip is get yourself a bunch of these on Amazon or wherever you can find them. These will slip right over this super glue, and then most other super glues that I've used, Bob Smith Industries, or I forget the other one, they'll have that tip that works well with it. All right, so yeah, very handy. These last me pretty much the whole day, and if they do get sealed up, then you just snip the tip and you keep using it for another couple of days. So, and these always come in a pack of a ton of them, at least 10 to 20, so you'll get a lot of use out of it. So that's a pro tip on that one. And then earlier I mentioned if you're gonna ditch the lighter part to do some melty things with the bungee cord to get it into the hinge, but you have some TPU filament, then you can just get a strip and then use that instead. If you've got 2.85 millimeters somehow, that works even better. But this is just a regular TPU and 1.75 millimeter. The hole itself is 2.5-ish, about 2.5, 2.75. But anyway, so that's the rundown of what you will need. Now let's get into the specific build. All right, let's start from the top. So the very first thing that I recommend is checking if you had good prints to begin with. With the DIY kit, I already cleaned it up for you, meaning I drilled out the holes already here, cleared out any debris, double check it just in case, but I tried to be pretty good about that to make sure that you didn't have to struggle with that. But those of you printing at home, make sure that everything is cleared out. Otherwise, you're going to strip a lot of screws and nuts throughout this whole process and get stuck or have to reprint things. But then again, that's what we're also trying to do, is trying to find out if we need to reprint anything. So always check your big prints, check that the mount is pretty okay, and then clean it up. You know, maybe you might destroy it in the process of cleaning it up, and then you decide, well, I guess I need to go reprint a new one. So it would have really sucked if you waited until the very end to clear out the supports that hold up the mount here. But let me just show you really quickly at home for those of you who are printing. This is where the spudger, the SpongeBob SquarePants, comes in handy. With my supports, I try to make it so that it's easy to do it with a tool like this. Is you just put this flat part down to that lip and then just try to run it across kind of gently. Make sure you don't put too much strength because you might punch through or miss and then cut yourself. So actually try to keep your hand out of the way. But then I just, try to do on the underside and then on the top side of the support. And if you did everything right, then the support should just fall out just like that, and then you just got do a little bit of cleaning. All right, so that's basically how you'd handle the supports if you're following my print settings. It should be as easy as that. And once again, love this tool. It's the MVP of my shop. So that's what you'll do first. And it's very important that you make sure that you clean everything out so that the nuts can go correctly all the way into where they're supposed to go. So your screws come in level, because if not, if they come in at an angle, then you're going to jam it, and then you're going to strip it, and you're going to be basically free spinning it in it, and the screw's going to be stuck. If at any point in time with any of your prints for any of my models especially that happens, most of my models have enough gap below where the nuts sit so that, let's say if you did have something that was stuck in there like so and then stripped, or the nut was jammed and it's not moving anywhere and you can't pull it out, hopefully it's not this far out, but I don't have a nut in there right now, but I'm just demonstrating. So you'd get your soldering iron and you'd basically heat that sucker up until you could push it in there. So essentially you seat the nut into the plastic. It's kind of like putting in inserts, really. And then I would try loosening it to get that screw out of there, because maybe you messed up the screw, and try a different one. But if you're brave, then try to tighten it from there and hopefully it'll do its thing. So that's a pro tip there for recovering from those situations. Otherwise, in some cases, especially in this case, if you can't alleviate that, then you're going to have to pretty much reprint the base. All right, so once these are all cleaned up and you've determined you don't have to reprint anything, everything looks pretty good. This side is cleaned up. There'll usually be supports here if you're printing it on your own, but I remove that because this prints downward. So you don't have to worry about that at all. Let's see if there's anything else. No, nothing on the inside. Very nice print off of Bamboo X1C. And same thing with the mount. Make sure you clear it out. I have a spare helicoid that I use just to make sure that it's tight. So another pro tip that I'll give you right here, if you do have an extra one of these or with a normal lens, and then say you've cleared out all of the channels and you realize that it's still way too tight. So if it's way too tight, then another trick you can do is you basically put in only one tab of the lens, and you're kind of putting it in at an angle. It sounds dangerous, I know, but not too much of an angle. This side over here should be very close to the bottom, but not close to where it pops in, just above. And then you do that, see? And you see how I kind of took a little bit of more chunk out of it? So you're essentially using the lens, and you bring it back the other way too to clear it back. You see some of this here. Yeah, there's a lot more debris in there that would have prevented the lens from turning freely. Yep, that's another pro tip there. All right, so let's open up the hardware pack here. What do we have? What do we have? Now, not everything in here is in the body. Well, on the outside of the body, the exterior, I know I had marked that as the exterior. I did include the magnets in here only because that's the very next step that I do personally, is because that's another area where if the holes were too tight and I really want to do the magnetic back, then I'm going to have to reprint. And obviously I want to determine that right now, early on, before I go too much further. So I would bring out the magnets, and then what I do is I get my CA glue with the little tip, and then you put in just one little dab in each hole to help hold it in there. If you feel that the print is very snug and the magnets are not popping out, then you don't do that. So the next thing I do, once the magnets are in, and I'll do the door as well since I'm doing the magnets, that way I'm sure I align them. So always make sure that I do them. Let me show you with the loose magnets. So again, as I showed you earlier, see that one doesn't. See, so I'll need to really hammer that in. So that's where the mallet comes in. So you'll do that all the way around with your little column here. And then when you do the door, you flip the column around and you put them in there all the way around. So you do that, and then so the magnets will line up properly. Otherwise, you'll have some pull reversal issues there. So those are pretty snug, so I'm not going to do the CA bottle or CA glue droplets into each hole for the magnets. I'll leave them as is. They're doing quite fine. And because you're hammering all that, that's why I don't install the cone. I think intuitively you're going to want to do that first because you want to start already envisioning the body coming together, but I leave that for a little bit later, just so I know that all the different points of no return have been passed. So the next thing that I would install is the cold shoes. As part of the cold shoe process, we're going to need the riser block here. This is a riser that I kind of designed to mimic, when you have the camera in portrait mode, it mimics like a 35mm flash top or pyramid prism top. All right, so we've got 2 sets of hardware. This is a hardware for the cone, and it's going to be 4 M3 by 16 screws, and there's going to be 2 different sets of nuts. There's a chrome set and a black set. So that's another pro tip there with plastics, and since you're always dealing with tolerances. With the hardware, I found that the chrome ones, since they don't have paint or any coating, they slide in and out of tighter prints more easily. So if you feel like your print is on the tight side, then use the chrome ones. If you feel like the chrome ones are just falling out, then use the black ones. And those should hold in there a lot more snug. So those would get installed whenever you decide to install the cone, the lens cone. Here we've got the wine knobs, the top knob and the bottom knob. And then let's check out the hardware. This is a rough layout of the order in which I would normally install it. Stuff on the outside. So I would start with the riser itself. And what I'm going to do is first drop a nut in there. And leave that off to the side. Actually, then you're going to have 3 different screw sizes here. You're going to have the longest one, the whole set at this point. One of the smaller ones, this is an M2 by 8. This was an M2 by 16, by the way. And then in the DIY kits, I added just so you'd be able to distinguish quickly between the two. They're not quite the same size, but you could get fooled while you're pulling them out of the bag. So this one has a rounded top, and it's because it's not going to be visible out of the 3 of these, so I wanted to make that distinction. So I'm going to already go ahead and start threading it in through there. And that also holds that nut in place so that it doesn't fall out. Still try to keep it faced downward a little bit or sloped like that so it'll stay put. And then over here, I would drop in a nut there and push it in. I'm not going to do the whole thing here. It's just a demo unit. But then I put in the other nut in here. So there's 2 nuts. One through this slot here, and then one through the top, and then push it towards that hole. And then that hole is where this is about to go. So you thread it in some more so you can align it up. And then once you have it lined up, then you just tighten that one all the way down. And with all the tightening on all of these plastics, there's no need to over tighten. Just do it so that it's snug right to where you can no longer turn the hex key with your fingers. That should be tight enough. Obviously, check it a little bit to make sure that it's not rattly loose, but don't over tighten it or you'll hear the plastic start to creak a little bit. But once that's all the way down, then you'd pop your cold shoe in there, and then you'd use the M2x8 one at the one over here on this side, because it only has a short way to go, and then since this one has a longer way to go, that's where you need that M2x16 there. All right, so that's pretty much that top part, or the riser part there. This side here, you're going to do almost the same thing. Put your nut in there, put your nut through there, and then attach your cold shoe. And then that also uses 2 M2x8 nuts, or screws, sorry. All right. So then the next thing that I would do is put in the knobs. So here you should test fit a little bit outside, just to make sure that they go in, because sometimes these are tight. So it should be a little bit snug, but you should be able to get it all the way in and be able to put it all the way out with your hands. If it's a little loose and it comes out easily, that's fine. The trick that you're going to do is you're going to use a little bit of glue anyway to keep it together. So this one I'll show you a little bit how I do it. Is first I put the spring. There's going to be 2 springs for this part here, which is the plunger. You take the plunger and the spring, you thread it through there and hold it with your thumb. You can feel it, test the springiness of it. And then this is the top one here, if you're orienting the camera in this way. So that's going to be your actual wind-up knob with the arrow. So how I do is, at this point, I bring out my CA glue with the little droplet and add a couple of drops on top of here. You don't want it to run. You don't want it to be too much, because then it's going to spill and it's going to glue your knob. So herein is another trick that I use, and here's where the helicoid grease comes in, or any other grease or Vaseline. Let's say you're crazy gluing somewhere where you have such a tight surface where it might spill over or drip into something. I actually lubricate that a little bit. I don't do any more because I've gotten really good with these. If you get really good with one of these little droplet thingies, then you're going to be golden. But if you've got a heavy hand or you're not using that, you're going to want to at least coat the inside channel here around with a little bit of lubrication of some type, and that'll prevent the glue from bonding it. So anyway, once you have your glue on there, you put your knob on there, you press it down tight so that it seats all the way. I'm not going to do that here because I don't want to have to take it apart, so we'll just leave it like that. And then while you're still holding it, if it's too loose, you're probably still going to have to hold it like so. And then you'll put in one of these little screws. Now these are M2x6 button screws because that's all I had anymore. But if you got the DIY kits, you got another 2 of the M2x8 screws that you've seen up here previously. So yeah, you'd screw that little bad boy in there and then let it go, and it should be good to go, and you should have a knob with a spring pull action. So, and then you rinse and repeat for the bottom knob. So at this point, what's left is if you wanted to add your thumb screw to the lens cone, let me zoom back out, then you can do that. I'm just going to do that later. I do the cone as one of the last things if you're going to paint it or you're going to do touch-up paint on it. But the last thing that we'll do on the body at this step is we'll put in the tripod bushings. So here for these, I also like to add a little bit of glue with my little dropper. I just add maybe to 2 sides in there. Maybe I should zoom back in. Yeah, I'll add drop on the inside on the threads. And then the trick with these is you actually want to turn them counterclockwise a little bit so that they're level. And once they sit, then you turn it clockwise. Because yeah, these threads, these plastic threads, they print, you know, with gravity, it sags them enough so that they're not the easiest to work with. But that's where your beefy flathead screwdriver comes in, so you can quickly tighten it before the glue takes hold. So I feel like this professional liquid Loctite does a good job of giving you enough time, but at the same time being fast enough. I don't like glues that are way too fast. I want to be able to adjust in case I went over, you know, on a alignment or went under. I want to be able to correct that. All right, so at this point, the entire body on the outside and the magnets should be completed. So we are ready for the next step. One thing that I sometimes do at this point, if you decide to already install the cone, every now and then I do try to do that at this point. So when you glue the tripod bushings in and you weren't using that type of glue, I feel this super glue doesn't cloud as much as other brands or types. Even the gel one clouds up a lot more than the pro version. Then you might have some cloudiness that formed around. Now you can try to clean it with helicoid grease. It does help a little bit, but Vaseline helps clear some of the cloudiness too. But if you don't want to do that, or you still feel like you've tried that before and it doesn't get rid of it to your liking with your glue, then at this point I would do touch-up paint all around. And a paint that I like using with the carbon fiber blacks a lot is this Deco Art satin finish paint. It's gotten the closest. I've probably bought a good 8, 9, 10 different paints that I could tell, trying to find the right balance of, you know, is it satin or semi-gloss or, you know, charcoal, or, you know, obviously not all blacks are created equal. For the interior, I'm bougie and I use black 2.0, although I could be super bougie and use black 3.0, but I've had this bottle forever since I only coat some cameras. I don't sell a lot of cameras that require it. The light color bodies are very rare, maybe 1 or 2 a month or so. Most of the time I'm selling black bodies, camera bodies with colored accents and stuff like that. But anyway, so again, that's something that I do while everything is drying. So the paint will dry, some more of the CA glue will dry, and then you can go and take a break at this point and do something else. But this is a DIY video. We're not going to do any of that. So let's get into the next step. All right, now I included this seal step here at this point, strip set here, sorry. And this is meant to cover up all the magnets once you put all the magnets in. So you could put this right away if you wanted to. If you feel you're going to be a little bit too messy still, then I would wait to put that at the end to hide any messy spots. And I always do that these days. I actually do this very last now, just so that's kind of like the cherry on top, you know, that last detail that you do before you putting in the nice carpets into the brand new car before you put it out on the dealer floor. Let's see, so we've got the film gate here. that gave me a lot of problems in production. Some of you that purchased from me, or most of you that purchased from me, know all about that sucker and everything that I went through. There's a hardware to install it, which is 4 screws at these. I like getting these in the Phillips pattern because it's easier to get into them and do them quickly at an angle than with the hex keys that I provide. I would have needed to find the hex keys with the little ball end, but I couldn't find those in bulk. So I decided to just get the screws Phillips because everybody's got Phillips screwdrivers, right? I hope. So you put that in there. Before you put the film gate in there, actually, you put in these film pull tabs. These will help you retrieve your film a lot more easily. Once you're done with the roll, pull the pull tab and then pull that, and it pops your film out. Just like they do on the batteries. I stole that idea from battery compartments. All right, before you actually put in the film gate, you're going to want to add the foam light seal, the light trap, sorry. And then you'll have this for that. And the way that works easiest is I peel back. I start off at the short end up there. Just a little bit. Like so. Let me zoom in. Yeah. Like so. And then I pinch. You're only bending the part that you're not going to use anyway. So it's okay. And that kind of gives me this little tab action if I need to kind of move it, manipulate it while I'm in there. So what I will do is I will try to center it over on this side and align it right, and then let it drop, and then get my finger in there to pat it down. Double check before you keep going. Pulling it like I do like that, pulling it or pushing it helps with this right now, getting into place. Okay, everything looks good. I've got it started. It feels good on this side. So now I just let it go. And if I'm lucky, sometimes it does it. Sometimes it does not. And there it sort of did it. So you gently tap it into place. Oh, mine ended up getting screwed up. So you can lift it up and do as I'm doing right now. It's harder to do with gloves. I don't recommend doing stuff with sticky tapes when you're wearing gloves like this, but my hands are super dirty and distracting right now with paint that doesn't come off, or I haven't really tried to get it off yet since I'm still working on some stuff. So at this point, you'll want to grab your dark slide. I haven't showed you that yet, but you'll want to grab dark slide material or something, or maybe one of the X-Acto blades works, and kind of like squeeze it into the slot there to help pat that down. And then you'd use it here kind of to do the same thing, to kind of squeeze the foam in there and pat that down. So you could use this tool if you haven't brought out the dark slide materials yet. But ideally you'd want to bring out the dark slide to help already start seating that track. All right, and this is short because this is just a strip. I don't have any regular size. Oh, actually, yeah, I do. Oh, here we go. A test one. All beat up. Yeah, so you use your dark slide to do that. In the DIY kits, I included 2 of these since they're so flimsy. This is the best I could do to make it reproducible. That way you just have to buy the aluminum card stock. These are just aluminum business cards that I cut to size, so you will always be able to easily replace your dark slide, and not try to have to hunt one down like most other cameras. When you lose a dark slide, sometimes it's death for your film back. If you like swapping lenses out. Another trick that I like doing here, if you feel you need to just use the bottom part of your tweezers, and then just, putting your finger over here this way, then press down that way. and then move your way back just to make sure that it's fully seated in there. And then after a while you can glide it. I wouldn't glide it initially, because if you've got a wrinkle in there and you push it, it's going to mess things up. So I'd rather press the first pass like I just did. I haven't done the top part yet. Tap, tap, tappy, and then you roll it back and forth gently. And that should be it. You've got the light trap in there now, and then just push that side over. And there you have it. Put your film gate in. There's a notch on one side. Only one side has the notch. That is on purpose, so you know how to orient it. And that should be in the bottom right. So you pop in your film gate, screw in your 4 Phillips screws. I missed a step with the interior part of the DIY. There's also included this piece that I call the base cap. And then the way that works is that goes in to fill in this area here, the gap that remains. So the best way to do it is first figure out how it slides in, so you understand how it works, and it goes like so. But then you need to make it permanent. So the way I recommend is, and sorry, I had already installed the door, so you'll see that later on in the video. But I add a little dab of glue, CA glue, right near the top, not towards the bottom, or else it'll get onto your dark slide area. But just add a little bit of drop of glue right to the top. And then I put it in and I push it all the way. And then what that'll do is it'll glue it to the film gate. So if you ever need to disassemble this to do something with the film gate, or to repair the light seal underneath or anything like that, then at that point all you need to do is get your X-Acto knife of some type and then just squeeze it between there and then just pop it, and then that should be able to break it free. And then just re-glue it. If it's snug enough, then you don't have to glue it. I don't on some of mine, but some of them are not snug. Depends on the print and the material, how it came out, because that's a pretty tight tolerance to try to nail, since there's multiple surfaces going on there. So so don't forget that step, like I just did. And I believe we are good to go with the interior film bay. This here is the door section. Pretty much laid out in the order that I would tackle it. So the first thing that you want to do is you take this long piece, which is your dark slide holder. It's going to be on the back. And that's what we want to do first, is we want to do this back side first, the very rear of the camera. So what you'll do is with this felt set that's included, or if you had to DIY it on your own and you got some felt tape, you can get a strip here, the long one here, and you add it to this side here, and that'll help keep the dark slide kind of snug in there when you install it on there. So once you have this long one on here, then again with your other MVP here, just add a little bit of drops in the channel carefully. Don't spill all the way around for the dark slide holder and the memo holder. And then you would just install them. Put them in there. Wait for it to dry. And ta-da! Now, since I like waiting for that to dry before I go on to anything else, I will squeeze in something else in here. So this is where I'll probably go back and install the lens cone onto the body, because why not? If I wanted to, since I'm waiting for that to dry, or maybe I've decided that that is now dry enough, then I'm going to want to do another round of touch-up paint, or I could leave that till the end. You could really wait to paint until the very end if you wanted to. But at least before attaching the lens cone to the body, if I need to do any touch-up paint to where it was on the bed, this is a textured bed, so I don't need it, but if I had done like a flat surface bed and I could see like all the scratches or marks from the imperfections, then I'm gonna want to paint over that or sand it and then paint it a little bit. So you could do that here while you're waiting for this to dry. Another thing that you can do is if you bought an option for the grip, then you can go ahead and that grip kit comes with a cold shoe, and everything else works the same way. You've got 2 M2 screws. You put your nuts through here. Make sure they're cleared out so that they don't jam in there. Put in your cold shoe, and by the time you come back, there's also, to install it on the body, there's the longer screws in here too. So that's self-explanatory though. I think since in cases where the screws are vastly different, I don't think there's really a lot to explain. I think you can all figure it out. It's really in those spots where there's multiple types of screws and they're all small that it gets tricky. But I think we've gone over the hardest part yet when it comes to the hardware, figuring out what hardware to use. So anyway, our thingy is dry here, and then what we would do next is we would flip this bad boy on over, and then we take our film window here, and then on the film window you'll notice that there's a little bump there at the edge, so you want that bump to be facing the hinge. So we're going to flip this that way and drop it into here like so. Make sure that it moves around, and it should. All right. And then on top of here, we're going to add this felt rectangle right here. And that helps just give it some pressure so it's not sliding around super flimsy and opening up on you. So once that is done, then we take this piece here. It's called the door insert. And then you'll see the arrows. You're going to want the arrows to be pointed this way, but facing down, because remember, this is what you're going to see on that back side. So you want to face it down with the little indicators now on the lock side. You add your glue. You're going to need to add some glue here carefully, again with your little droplet thingy in the corners. And I also add a little bit here too, since this is a nice flat spot that'll help me bond something to it. Boom, I drop it in. The next thing that I do is I start adding the pressure plate. So for this camera, to get it nice and slim, especially on the back door, I wanted to get creative with the pressure plate. I could have done something with the plastic itself and made it springy, but I don't know. You know, it could break, and then how are you going to replace it? You'd have to replace the whole door. So I thought to myself, well, what if a DIY person or somebody at home had issues with it? What's the best way for it? And this is the best way that I could figure how, is basically a 2 millimeter thick foam that you're going to put here once you peel it off. Let's just pretend that we put that in there already. You're going to apply the foam to this plate once it's dry. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take the pressure plate itself, and the pressure plate itself has a little arrow. That's an up arrow. I mean, it looks like a V if you're facing it the other way, I suppose. But it's meant to be an up. All right. And that faces on the inside, so that what touches your film is the nice smooth side, not the arrow side. And what I do here is, you're gonna call me crazy, but it works pretty well, is I add CA glue around the window holes, and then not too far to the side, because as you can see, there's a gap here. So I basically do it right from like so all the way to like right about here. So once my glue is on there, I carefully make sure that it doesn't drop or run, and then I center it on top of here. I'm gonna move this out of the way. When you put it in there, you should center it so that there's enough space on both sides of this protruding upward section of the back door. All right, and I don't press it down immediately right away when I put the glue on there, because I realize that while it's still wet, you can like move it just a little bit, nudge it, and then press it down, and then it kind of bonds in that new spot. When you dropped it down, it dropped in correctly. So you still have a little bit of adjustment there. All right, and then that should do it for that part of the door. Next up on the door, we've got the dark slides. You could do that until the end. You don't need to do that at this step. I just include them in here in this part of the package. Otherwise, they'd be on their own. But that works this way. You can add some glue into this piece. Zoom in some more there. You add some glue into this piece. You put your dark slide material there. You wait for it to set a little bit. The metal of the bond that will bond to the plastic pretty quickly, and then you carefully drop that on top of it. And this is where, and then you can clamp it together. You can do whatever we want to just hold it together while it bonds. You can use binder clips for production. That's what I was using all the time. So then you set that to the side, and then that will dry. And again, this little bad boy here helps CA glue from becoming a horrible mess when it comes to the surface quality of your plastics. If you're not painting, if you're going to sand and paint, then you don't need to care about any of this. You're going to sand and paint, or just paint, primer and paint. The last part of the door, before we attach it to the body, is we want to install the lock. So there's 4 components to the lock, 5 technically. If we flip the lock over, then that's where we will add this piece of felt on top of that. Make sure that at this point, here's where you want to bring out your X-Acto knives, because this one's not cleaned. And on the DIYs, I didn't clean this part of it. So you may need to, I tried to find buttons that were looking good and had stuff that looked easy to just flick out. But yeah, clear out that square and then practice putting in the lock. So the orientation is, you'll notice that the lock is off center, and I did that on purpose. So the off center part is down, right? So it's higher on the top than it is on the bottom. So just remember that, and that's how you're going to install it on the door. Let me put that to the side. Yeah, so it's going to be in that direction like that. The short side facing the lock. Okay. And then the lock itself, or if you can tell, there's a little hook to it. So the hook faces into the door. So if you flip it around here, the hook is facing me right now. Hopefully you can tell from there. Right, and you put it like so. But before we do that, test fit it. Always test fit these parts. Make sure that it sits flush and then it goes in deep enough. It should be able to hold on its own with a little bit of pressure put into it. So that way you'll know it won't flick on you when you're doing the next step, because that is a tricky step. Refocus there. So you put in your lock. It should look like that at this point. See, with the hook facing into the door. So here's a pro tip from earlier. Using the helicoid grease or any other type of grease, Vaseline, whatever you've got, is lubricate around the lock so that, and then up on top here, maybe add a little bit of lube to the surface of the door so that you won't accidentally glue the button to the door or glue the lock to the door. That's very important. And you're going to hold it with your thumb, and you're going to come up here, and I like moving it over to one side, so I'm using at least the side here to help me hold it in place. And then you're going to add a drop of glue on top. And then where's my button? It's in my hand. And your button, remember, the short side facing down. Make sure not to get any glue onto the button itself, so you gotta basically do it really carefully. I'm gonna pretend there's glue in there, and I'm gonna hold it, pinch it like that for a moment, and make sure that it doesn't budge on me. So now, since we knew that we fit it earlier and it could be let go, then that's something that you can do now. And then you would bring out your screwdriver or your hex key and then install the little button screw right into there. And that'll screw into the lock to further solidify it. And since you had enough CA glue in there, hopefully some got into the channel, so then you're essentially crazy gluing the screw all the way through together with the from the button to the block. And the last step of the door, we're gonna pretend we already installed the little screw there, is the cover that covers all that. So make sure that there's enough lube, but don't go to the corners on the lube just yet, and don't move it around just yet. You're gonna wait for that until the end, until, using our little droplet thingy, we add 1, 2, 3, 4 corners worth of glue, and then you drop this in there. Before you drop in the glue, test fit it to see how it fits, to see if that hole is big enough for the lock. Yep, so that's what that looks like. So let's just say that's glued in there and drying. Then once you feel it's dry enough, then you can move, I hadn't glued it yet, but then you can move the lock back and forth to make sure that there's enough space. But that's why I always say try to test fit things beforehand, so you know that if you need to trim anything, cut anything, sand anything, before it's too late, before it's assembled, then you can't take it apart. The last thing here is, depending on how much glue you added, some may have spilled up to the top, which basically added material to your door. So when you close it onto your body, that may give you issues because of that ledge. So just keep in mind that if you ever see that your door is not seating properly onto the body, and it looks flat, then it's probably because something up here, or even on the body too, especially around these slots, these M3 slots for the grip, depending on the print, those little corners there could bulge out. So you may need to kind of sand it or trim it a little bit with a knife, an X-Acto or something. All right, let's pretend that everything is installed on the door. And now let's go to the almost end. Remember, we still have the seals to do. And you might have already installed the grip, and then you might have already installed the lens cone. Those are self-explanatory, so I'm not really going to go into those. And I'm going to make a separate video if you bought the lens cones that have the helicoids in them with the focusing grips or wheels, whatever. Check out my other videos. I should have that one up along with this one. So let's attach the stinking door. How do we do that? So first, if you printed on your own and you feel like your overhangs are pretty bad, then you're going to want to take your 1/8 drill bit and then try to clean up some of these holes. But try not to, because then if you do that, this next trick may not work perfectly. It may work okay, but you decide. So we're gonna install the door hinge, which is a bungee hinge, and you're gonna move that out of the way. And included in that is these little cylinders, which is basically just shrink tube wrapping that I've cut into this size, so I could use kind of like a cap for the hinge. And how do I do that? Again, cheater mode. If you don't want to do that, let's do that first. Then you just thread this through here. Thread it enough Let's just, should probably zoom in here. Thread it enough so that you can slide it in there. Since this is such a thin strip, and you let it go and that'll work. So that's probably the easiest way to do it, and it'll hold in there. Again, it'll survive to a catastrophic failure. Like if you rip it, then you know it's, you can just put it back. But that's probably not going to happen. I don't think that ever happened to me where I ripped it. I'm just being overly cautious, thinking of all of you out in the field. But this is much better to me than a hardware hinge that doesn't have any flex in it, and which means that if your dimensions aren't right when you close it, then it can crack or split or whatever. And the other thing that this allows is, along with a little bit of give that there is in the spring and the lock, and along with these foam seals when you add them, you basically have a back door that itself is one entire pressure plate. It's got enough play in it, so you know it's got some give. That's the point of this door, why I made it that way. Film flatness is pretty good, and it's a small area too, so it's not gonna have too much of a difficulty staying flat. So for the hinge, what you want to do first is you want to start threading it in, and I left it long enough so that see right here, it's already bumping. It's not letting me go through. Oh, it did let me go through. Okay, I might have some issues there. Okay, so you leave it like that a little bit, and then you take one of the shrink tube caps and you pop it into that end. Now you see how that's frayed? That's okay. You're gonna bring this all the way up to very close to the end there, right? And then you still have a little bit in there. You're gonna realize why in a moment, right? You want to have it started already in there. It doesn't need to be all the way, just enough so that it's already in there. Then you're gonna get your lighter. Make sure that that's aligned properly. You're gonna get your lighter. Or heat gun. If you got a heat gun, that works too. And you know, kind of the frayed end helps hold the cap if you're using gravity to your advantage. So I'm gonna melt it a little bit. I'm gonna heat it up. Be careful not to overheat it. I think that's about melty enough for me. And then what I'm gonna do is, you got plenty of time to do this step. Watch how long it's gonna take me to find an X-Acto knife that I can use. And I'm gonna push it here. And then when you bring it to the end and you start pulling it, you see it starts deforming. Then press it the rest of the way with the X-Acto knife. You know, or you could have used your spudger, or you could use, you know, the end of that. Whatever you feel is the safest for you to do. Oop, see, it's a good thing I didn't have an X-Acto knife, because I was looking at the camera there and that would have been bad. But yeah, so what you did there is you basically created, I don't know if it'll show in the camera, it kind of does, a little end cap there. And let's pop it out. See, so now if you pull this, you won't be able to pull it past there. It's stopping right there. So now we're going to try to do that over in the other end somehow. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see what I do. So at this point, the end is probably a little bit frayed, and I did have enough length in there so that you can trim it along the way. So bring out your scissors, nip the tip so you've got a nice clean edge, no frays, and then now you put it in through that part of the door, and then you put it in through the bottom part of the body hinge. Okay, so at this point I want there to be more play over on this side than on that side. But as I move the door around and I'm pulling at the same time, then we should be good to go. And it's already in there. Okay, cool. So I pull it some more to just make sure that there's no play in there and it's all the way through now. And it is. So the next thing I do is now I wiggle it around. And then so with my fingernail, I'm wearing gloves right now, but with my fingernail, I pinch it and I pull it. And while I'm holding it over here, I bring out my marker one-handed. Maybe you should have the top off already. And then you mark the end there. And then you let it go. And then move the door back and forth. And if you did it right, the little silver mark or pencil, if you use pencil, should be right below the edge of the hinge, which is great. That's where we want it to be. If it's sticking up too far up, then keep that in mind for this next step, because then you'll need to adjust. Otherwise, you'll have too much slack in there and the door won't open and close properly. So the next step that you do is you pull it, you close the door, and then you basically pull the hinge onto there, and you see that kind of snags it. So this allows you to work on the hinge, or the bungee here. And you see that's our gray mark there. It's not focusing. Whatever. But I think you could kind of see it. All right, so then we're going to take our another cap. We're going to thread that in. And then now we're going to take our scissors. And for the DIY folks, I included 2 of these so you can practice on one. If you mess this one, then just use the extra strips of this to practice. I think I included 5 caps. So you're going to want to cut it a little bit above the silver mark. I would say maybe like about 1 millimeter or 2, maybe 2 millimeters. All right, and then fray it a little bit so it could act as a stopper for your thing there, your cap. And here we're going to do the same thing that we did on the other side. We're going to melt it. So this time we do want to have our X-Acto ready. I'm not going to use an X-Acto, actually. I'm going to use that surface there. So I bring on my lighter or my heat gun, or a little torch probably works better. And I start cooking it. Get a little bit closer. All right, that looks kind of melty already. And then you try to grab it. I don't think it'll be hot. And then you move the door over here to the side like that a little bit. And you move it enough so that it starts pulling it a little. You see how it's doing that? And then you press it in with your device there, whatever edge you have. So I know I've been doing like hundreds of these already with this camera, so I've gotten pretty good at it. But I was looking at the camera most of the time and kind of doing it blind. So, and the next step is just to move the door until you feel like it's closing properly. Wiggle it around so that the hinge works well, and that should be it. If you do notice that you're having some issues, then that's probably because the cap is a little bit too fat. So you can grab your cutters. I think cutters works best. The X-Acto knife, probably not as good. And then go in there and then just clean it up a little bit. You obviously don't want to cut off so much that it gets smaller and then it'll pull right through. But anyway, that's the bungee hinge. And that's how you do it. So you have another one that's included that you could practice with. Again, if I would just chop that, if I would have messed that one up, then I would have just kept maybe using another one or two, maybe just one more end cap to practice again outside of it. Another thing that you can do too is just do one end, the easiest end, and then just snip it. But if you do snip it, remember when you pulled off the door and you had the TPU in there? That was easy to put in because the edges aren't frayed. So if you are going to have it, you don't have to do the end cap on the bottom end like I just did. You could just do it at the top part like I initially did in the earlier step. But make sure that the end, like you heat it up or something, or make it sharp. So that way if you do pull the hinge all the way out, you can thread it back in pretty easily. Because that might be a little bit more difficult to do, putting it back in with the hinge than with the TPU. But at least you know you've got this as a plan B in case you do mess up both of these. And I'm sure regular filament, PLA, if you put some PLA in there, or PTG or nylon, whatever you've got, that'll work well. 2.85 too, I just didn't feel justified in buying a $40-50 spool of 2.85 TPU versus a 2.5 millimeter bungee cord. Now the TPU is probably easier to work with though. That is it for the door. So the seal kit, what do we call this? I'm gonna call this like the, it's not technically a light seal kit. Just call it a liner. Yeah, the magnet liner. So in this, you'll notice that there's 2 arrows. That's the upward direction. And then if you notice really carefully, you'll notice that, can you even see it on the camera? These on this side have all squared edges because that's for the base. These on this side have rounded edges because those are for the door. So just keep that in mind. I mean, the sizes are pretty close, so if you mess that up, it's okay. Again, the only real purpose of these is just to hide the magnets, and then just to prevent the magnetic clank from sounding like that. It sounds more like a thud, like a thump, and a clank. And I do those clockwise. So what I'll do is I'll start with the arrow one that has the squared edges all the way around, or square corners all the way around, sorry. And I'll center the opening. It's got an opening in there. Let me take off that little part so you can see it better. And that's the door side. See, so that little opening will help you center it around the lock, and then lay it flat. Go clockwise, small strip, long strip, small strip. Flip it around, do the lock side, clockwise, small strip, long strip, small strip. And after all that is said and done, you should have a completed NanoPano. Last thing that I will mention here in this video is there is a viewfinder for this platform along with masks for all the Mamiya press lenses, and you can use the 127 and the 75 millimeter and the 150 millimeter for the goose lenses, I suppose. And then there's also an accessory kit with a bubble level and then 2 laser bracket holders for the 2 different types of brackets that I use most of the time. Again, if you got one of the lens cones that has a helicoid in it for a leaf shutter lens, a large format, or other type of lens, check out the other video where I will break down what's included with that kit and then how to calibrate your lens. All right, peace out.